Surrender, Fafutis. You dirty dog, whoever you are, tell the one who sends you that Fafutis knows no fear. If you're a man and you have the guts, let's you and I compete in a sword fight. Fafutis, tomorrow your head will be in Calavrita. Instantly, the serene countryside turned into a battlefield, a pandemonium of bullets, smoke, and screams. 4 of the young men of Fafutis who took to the mountains recently, one to avoid the mandatory army service, and the others for family feuds, lost their nerve and surrendered to the authorities. The only one who remained totally calm in this pandemonium was Christophoros. Fafutis, you're a coward, hollered the same thunderous voice, but this time from about 100 feet. I'm about to show you who's a real man and who's a coward, Fafutis growled. Fafutis and Charybdis then began to crawl toward the direction of the voice. The men of the National Guard answered with a new shower of bullets, and Charybdis was fatally wounded, and Fafutis was hit on the left arm. He then pulled out his revolver and began to shoot, taking cover behind a rock. He fought for a few minutes, and then he was heard crying out, "The dirty dogs got me!" and he collapsed to the ground. The trees and the bushes were teeming with soldiers who now apprehended the 4 young men without any resistance. They untied Christophoros, and they began to beat mercilessly the 4 young men who had joined Fafutis. "In the name of Christ and the Theotokos, please stop beating these young men unjustly," Christophoros hollered. "They did nothing wrong." The soldiers ceased the abuse at once and greeted Katsoufis, their lieutenant, who was in charge of all the military troops of the area. Katsoufis was escorted by Nicholas Tsopotos, Yannis Mermingas, and Adonis Stathis, who directed the troops through these trails, being very familiar to them. The lieutenant was informed well about all the activities that took place in Arbouna, and the night before he searched and apprehended the gypsy. Using promises and tortures, he made him spill the beans about the plans of Fafutis' gang, and his primary purpose was to save Christophoros from the hands of these criminals. He had heard so many impressive things about the elder, so he decided to ask only for his witness and testimony and not waste any time interrogating the 4 young thieves. Christophoros began to answer the lieutenant and said, "It was a bad storm, my captain, and now it's over. The culprits paid for their deeds, and may our most merciful God forgive them." "And these 4 other culprits?" the lieutenant asked. "I don't see any other culprits, my captain," Christophoros said. The lieutenant was caught by surprise. "So you are telling me that these 4 are not criminals?" And pointing to Katerina, he asked, "What about this poisonous viper? What is she?" "These young men, my captain, are not criminals, but people of God. They made the wrong choice and ran to the mountains because of family discord and not because of malice. Not only they have no blood on their hands, but during these difficult moments they guarded me and protected me when someone suggested having me killed. All 4 of them acknowledged their mistake, and they were looking for a way out. This is why you had no fatalities today, and you quickly subdued and defeated the most bloodthirsty criminal that ever was, because these 4 young men refused to fire their rifles even once." "What about this viper? What do you have to say about her?" "She did nothing at all. She came to the chapel of Prophet Elijah to ask for forgiveness and found herself in the midst of this raid. In fact, I am indebted to her because she hid my name from Fafutis, and that's what kept me alive." "That's strange. The gypsy gave us a totally different account, the captain said in disbelief. If what the gypsy said was true, then why did she hide my identity and didn't expose me? She could have easily have done this because I caused her much difficulty in the last few days. John Mermingas, Nicholas Sopotos, and Andonis Stathis were totally convinced that things went down much differently, but they kept quiet. You scored a great victory today by taking out Fafoutis and Karoupis, said Stathis, so please, treat these 4 prodigal children with mercy, just like our Papulacos suggested. Please grant me this favor, Captain. Free them so they can take the path of Christ. I vow for them from this moment, and I know the type of responsibility I assume on their behalf. The captain asked his soldiers to give him some privacy, and he remained alone with the 4 penitent thieves, Katerina and Christopanagos. Did you hear well what Papulacos vowed for you? The captain asked the 4 men. We heard, the boys answered with their heads lowered. Are you aware that I have the authority to separate your heads from your body and take them to the center of Kalavrita, along with the heads of Fafoutis and Karoupis? Yes, we are aware of this, the 4 answered. So tell me, what are you going to do if I spare your life and set you free? The boys looked at him in the eyes and hesitated to answer, but Vlasis, who was wiser and more level-headed, answered for all of them. We will go wherever you command us, and we will live our lives according to the counsel of Papulacos from this point on. Vlasis' answer pleased the captain, and now he turned his attention toward Katerina. Katerina, suspecting that he would soon ask her the same question, she jumped up like a chased fox, dashed with lightning speed toward the adjacent cliff, and dove off. 1 hour later, the soldiers dragged up her crushed and lifeless body. Christopanagos turned to his 3 friends from the village and said to them, "Take the body of our unfortunate sister Katerina and give her a burial." When they all left, he walked to the chapel of Prophet Elijah and spent the night praying for the souls of Katerina, Fafoutis, and Karoupis. Following the unfortunate events that unfolded around the chapel of Prophet Elijah, Christophoros took the trail leading toward the peak of Gamila. There, he arrived at a cabin owned by his family, situated on several acres of land. His brothers had abandoned the place 2 years earlier, as it had become too far out of their way. The area boasted one of the most beautiful and picturesque locations on the entire mountainside. Nestled beneath 2 imposing peaks to the north, the view and splendor unfolded as far as the eye could see, stretching from east to west. Wild chestnut and oak trees provided ample coverage from the summer sun, and the only building, a humble cabin built by the Panayotopoulos family, stood as a shelter for the local shepherds. The mountainous hesychastic location was Christopanagos' prime choice as the place to begin living out his monastic calling. Water was abundant year-round, and the site was far less accessible than the chapel of Prophet Elijah. Initially, his brothers had planned to build additional structures, so they gathered stones, lumber, and other materials. These were now readily available, bringing great joy to Christopanagos. He gazed at the cabin and began to mentally expand it, envisioning it as a church. Later, he planned to build cells for a small Cenobitic monastery, all for the glory of God. That was all well and good, but how would he undertake this expansion without carpenters or money to pay for labor? His thoughts turned to his money bag and the share he had left with his brothers. Had he not given up his share, he could have easily solved this problem. In retrospect, he questioned how he had handled his finances and whether he had wrongfully used his money to satisfy the greed that plagued his brothers rather than saving it for this holy endeavor. He quickly dismissed these thoughts and felt a sense of relief, knowing that he had chosen to walk this uphill battle of faith as light as a feather, with involuntary poverty as his companion and a piece of bread in his bag. The only treasures he carried were his books and the small miraculous icon of the Dormition of the Theotokos, hidden within his holy scriptures. This icon, inherited from his mother, had always remained with him. As he sat on a rock to catch his breath, he retrieved a piece of dried bread from his bag and dipped it in water, his gaze fixed firmly on the cabin. Suddenly, his thoughts turned to the man of God Ignatios Lambropoulos, abbot of the historic monastery of Spilaio. His fame had reached Christopanagos' ears, as he was regarded by many as one of the great preachers and spiritual fathers of the entire Peloponnese. The soul of Christopanagos was highly intrigued by the spirituality of this hieromonk. Though he happened to be 35 years younger than himself, he thought it would be wise to go see him, confess to him, and receive a blessing before embarking on his new path, which included the church expansion he had envisioned. The monastery of Spilaio is considered the oldest monastery in Greece, founded by Simeon and Theodore, two brothers from Thessaloniki, in 362 AD. While in Jerusalem, they both had the same vision, instructing them to travel to Achaia to find the icon of the Virgin Mary, which had once been painted by evangelist Luke. This icon had been given to the prefect Theophilos of Achaia, for whom the evangelist wrote the Gospel and the Acts of the Apostles. After receiving dreams and visions, the two brothers were led to a young shepherd girl who took them to the Spilaio cave, where the miraculous icon of St. Luke had been hidden. There, they spent the rest of their lives building the monastery. It took Christopanagos 3 days to reach the foothills of this magnificent site, a monastery perched on a precipitous rock. He passed through the gates, where a monk greeted him and led him to the Catholicon, the main church, where the monks were chanting the Vesper service. At the end of the service, he was invited to join the Brotherhood for Trapeza, the evening meal, after which he would be taken to the Xenona, to the pilgrims' quarters. When they chanted the Apolitikion, the dismissal hymn of the Dormition, after Trapeza, the Archondaris, the monk in charge of the pilgrims, asked him about the duration of his stay and informed him of the monastery's service schedule. Father, is it possible to meet with the abbot tomorrow or whenever he's available? Unfortunately, Archimandrite Ignatius is on a preaching journey and may not return for a few weeks. If you wish to confess or speak with someone, his assistant, Father Philotheos, is a very experienced spiritual father and would be happy to see you, the monk replied. May it be blessed, Father, nan ευλογημένο, Christopanagos said as he closed the door behind him. He lay awake praying before the talandon sounded at 3 a.m., summoning the brothers to the morning services. After the liturgy concluded, one of the monks informed him that he was to meet with hieromonk Philotheos at the abbot's quarters at 9 a.m. Christopanagos prayed to the Panagia, asking her to illumine Father Philotheos, to place the words of the Holy Spirit in his heart and to guide him according to God's holy will. Christophoros knocked on the door of the abbot's quarters, and Father Philotheos welcomed him, leading him to the confessional. He made a prostration before the Father Confessor, kissed his hand, and sat down in a chair as directed by the holy priest monk. Father Philotheos was an elderly mega schema monk with a long white beard and a peaceful demeanor. Christophoros immediately felt at ease and began his general confession, swiftly recounting the main events of his life, but providing much more detail about recent happenings. His relationship with Fotini, the visions he experienced during his illness, his troubles with vile Katerina and Aunt Kelly, the conversation with his brothers, and finally, the deaths of Katerina and the two criminals. Father Philotheos sat motionless, listening intently. His gaze rested on the floor as he prayed with his komposchini, his prayer robe, remaining silent until Christophoros had completed his life confession. Then, breaking his silence, he spoke. "So you are Christophoros from Arbouna," he said, deeply moved by the piety of this man of God. "Great is the name of the Holy Trinity," he continued. 3 days ago, a soldier came to confess after shooting Fafutis dead. He told our monks everything that happened near the chapel of Prophet Elijah, including your attempt to save the 4 villagers and the woman you spoke of in your confession. "Brother Christophoros," he continued, "you have lived as a monastic in the world for your entire adult life. You have been called by Christ in a most powerful way, and now you seek a blessing to build a church and a hermitage. It is clear to me that the time has come for you to receive the angelic schema. If you have no objections, I would like to tonsure you in 3 days during Saturday night Vespers." "May it be blessed, Father," Christophoros answered, his eyes welling with tears, while the priest monk placed his right hand on his head and read the prayer of absolution. Father Theophilos instructed another priest monk to familiarize Christophoros with the service of monastic tonsure and the solemn vows he would be making before God and the people. Christophoros spent the next 2 days praying unceasingly. After Saturday Vespers, he was supported by the arms of Father Philotheos and another priest monk who escorted him before the holy altar. He was asked to kneel for the initial hymns and prayers of the angelic schema. At the end of the hymns and prayers, the celebrant priest began to inquire of him, saying, "Why have you come, brother, falling down before the holy altar and before this holy brotherhood?" "I desire the life of asceticism, Reverend Father," Christophoros replied. "Do you desire to be worthy of the angelic schema and be enrolled in the choir of the monastics?" "Yes, with God's help, Reverend Father." "Do you come to the Lord of your free will?" "Yes, with God's help, Reverend Father." "Not from any necessity or violence?" "No, Reverend Father." This very solemn and lengthy service was now completed, and the priest offered up the closing prayer. "Bless, sanctify, and set a guard from every harmful influence, visible and invisible, about him who has inclined his head to you, the head of fire, the invisible and only wise God." Sunday morning, the newly tonsure monk Christophoros partook of the body and blood of Christ and continued to live in the joy of heaven with the grace of the schema flooding his being. He stayed at Spilaio for a week, and with the blessing of Father Theophilos and the Brotherhood, he began his journey back to his family's property to undertake the construction of the church and his future monastery. 3 days later, he was climbing the foothills leading to the shepherd's cabin. At some point, he stopped praying and began to reflect on the challenges ahead. Not having any construction knowledge, nor any workers available, how would a penniless monk begin to build a church and a monastery? The more his rational mind raised objections and walls, the clearer the whispering mystical voice inside him became. This area must be turned into a monastery. He pulled a few dry figs and a piece of bread from his bag, and after he finished eating, he placed the icon of the Theotokos on the adjacent rock and began to pray. He was certain that her grace, which had saved him from certain death and kept him standing through so many temptations, would once again illumine his weak nous and give him the strength to build this monastery. There, while praying and without realizing it or having any prior thoughts on the matter, he made an offering. He promised to dedicate the church and the monastery to the grace-filled feast of the Dormition of the Most Holy Theotokos.